You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I'm trying to tell you that as a fighter, pound for pound, my boy Jimmy Cagney will disintegrate your Sylvester Stallone. He'll knock his block off.
In a street fight, maybe. Yes, I give you that. But not in a movie. Especially now with today's cinematic advancements. It's technologically impossible.
We've never heard an argument like that before, have we? John Candy says that the reason his hero wins is because of cinematic advancements. So what does represent a proper criteria for judgment? Most of the sci-fi debates, all we hear about is
big honkin' space guns, sir.
Big honkin' space guns. Space guns.
It is a weapon of great power, O'Neill.
Big and honkin'.
That's how it usually ends up in forums, is broadside versus broadside, and nobody talks about anything else. So I made it a point to study real-life warfare. For instance, this is On War by Carl von Clausewitz. 33 Strategies of War. Would you believe that every one of them, all 33, just involve broadsides exchanged? Maybe not.
How was the mission? Was it a success?
We did get all the ships.
I wish I could have been there to see it.
Space battles are always a lot more exciting on TV than they are in real life.
But wars aren't fought mano a mano. It's a whole government versus the whole government, or the whole society versus the whole society in a full-scale conventional war. Since we're talking about different sci-fi franchises with various levels and types of technology, a lot of people feel that you can't really compare them, but I think that you can. So using real-life warfare as a template, put together a list of judgment criteria in order of importance by category. And how do we put those in order of importance? Well, I thought about what are the most empowering things. Having a strength in this area gives you the most capability, the most flexibility, things like that. But even more weight is placed on what things are the most limiting. If you have a weakness in this area, it's more limiting than in that area because of how often things come up. How does it allow you to project your power over distance, because we're talking about interstellar distance here. So the things you need to wage interstellar warfare in order of importance by category. To fight interstellar war, the first thing you need is interstellar travel. If you don't have FTL, faster than light travel, or some other way like stepping through a Stargate or something that gives you a wormhole to another planet. If you don't have interstellar travel, you're not going to fight interstellar war. If you don't have transgalactic travel, you're not going to fight galactic scale war. If you don't have intergalactic travel, you're not going to fight intergalactic war. And some of the various groups that we cover do have those things and others don't. Let's say you have a group that has transgalactic travel, like say the Borg, versus a group with just local space travel, a few star systems here, a few star systems there, like say the Narn from Babylon 5. Well, the Borg would have an insurmountable FTL advantage because they can go on the offensive against the Narn. The Narn are not going on the offensive back the other way. The best they could ever do is try to defend their own territory, but they're not going to Borg space and invading it. In Star Trek, why are the Borg so dangerous? People say, well, they can adapt to your weapons and defend themselves from all and stuff. That's nonsense. The Borg are a threat because they can get here. And once they get to Federation space, then they can cause all kind of trouble. But if they were stuck in the Delta Quadrant, they didn't have transgalactic travel, they wouldn't be a threat.
We are cautiously entering the Delta Rana star system 3 days after receiving a distress call from the Federation colony on its 4th planet. The garbled transmission reported the colony under attack from an unidentified spacecraft. Our mission is one of rescue and, if necessary, confrontation with a hostile force.
In this example from The Survivors, Enterprise arrives 3 days after their colony was destroyed. So let's say the colony is leveled on Tuesday, Enterprise comes cruising in on Friday. Smoke's already cleared and it's all over. So name a sci-fi warship that, assuming it's on site, that could not level that colony of farmers in 3 days. Because I can't think of one. A company of Mississippi National Guard, assuming they were on site, could destroy that colony in 3 days. I've been told that, no, I wouldn't waste my battleship just trying to save this colony over here. Well, we could get into the political problems with that, but herein lies the point. If you don't have competitive FTL, competitive with the opponent, you're not going to pick your battles. They are. Let's assume for a moment this was an invading force, and there was no godlike being on the planet to destroy them. So it's 3 days before help arrives. Now, if this group did not have transporters and food replicators, things like that, they do now. If they didn't have a map of Federation territory, they do now. If they didn't have examples of Federation technology, they do now. So let's say you're in the midst of a war. Now let's give the opponent a little bit of credit, and let's assume they've gathered a little bit of intel, and let's assume that they have a little bit of planning capability. Now, if they've picked a battle and they choose to go to this colony or this planet or this space station, whatever, they kind of know what you have there, and they plan an attack. They probably expect to be successful. So whatever the technology level, whatever it is, they have gathered enough forces to take that position before they make their attack. Okay, give them a little bit of credit. So do you have the logistical capability, once you receive the distress call, to change the tactical situation? They know how many people you have, how many weapons you have, all that kind of stuff there. Can you get another ship or ships or army or whatever to that site before it's over?
The Republic fleet is on the defensive and pushed to the brink as war rages in the much-contested Outer Rim territories. Chaos and fear mount as the Separatist army rages an epic battle against heavily outnumbered Republic ships. In the far reaches of the Quell system, Anakin Skywalker and his Padawan Ahsoka race across the galaxy to aid Jedi Knight Aayla Secura, who is in the midst of a fight for her life as the sinister droid army closes in.
Our shields are gone!
All right, Skywalker, we're depending on you.
Repair the gunships.
If you can get there in a few minutes or a few hours, you might can save the day. If you get there a few days later, a few weeks later, if you can't get there, you're not going to change the tactical situation. FTL travel, your ability to move from star system to star system, is the single most important factor in interstellar warfare.
This is the status of the Pegasus galaxy before the ancients encountered the Wraith. The blue stars represent systems either inhabited by or protected by the ancients. Then, this is how it looked after they fought for almost 100 years.
Until Atlantis was all that was left.
Yes, sir. That's when the siege began. For several more years, the Atlanteans were able to hold off their attackers, relying on the city shield and superior weaponry, including the weapon satellite system. But no matter how many Wraith ships they destroyed, more kept coming. They could win almost every battle, but they saw no way to win the war. So, they submerged the city and left.
In Stargate Atlantis, the Ancients were far more advanced than the Wraith, but the Wraith greatly outnumbered them, and they defeated the Ancients. And the Asgard in the same franchise are almost comically advanced. I mean, some of the stuff they do, I mean, it's a joke in the show, some of the things that they can do. But the Replicators, due to greater numbers and things, greater logistical capability, almost destroyed them. And the same Asgard had to bluff the Goa'uld that they could fight them, and protect Earth and other planets, because they admitted several times they couldn't do it. So it was a bluff. They didn't have the numbers to fight a war on two fronts. And aliens, how many Xenomorphs did the Colonial Marines blow away? Tons of them. But there were too many. They were so outnumbered they didn't have enough ammo to defend themselves. And there were so many. So numbers, another big factor. Everybody wants to think tactically and not strategically. People say in World War II, tanks. The Germans had Panthers and Tigers and things like that. Why did we keep sending these Shermans? Why didn't we counter with a heavy tank of our own sooner?
It's also been pointed out that Tiger duels are very rare. Steve Zaloga did some hunting around. But in Northwest Europe, between D-Day and the fall of Germany in 1945, guess how many times American tankers met Tiger Ones? 4. Too many. The answer is 3. The first time the Shermans won, the second time the Pershing lost, and the third time the Tigers were getting loaded onto flat cars, so it wasn't really a fair fight.
So according to that, trying to defend the fatherland, fighting on their own turf after D-Day, German Tigers managed to intercept and engage American Shermans one time. There are 50,000 Shermans, that's 10,000 platoons, 5 tanks per platoon. So 10,000 platoons, they intercepted and engaged 1 platoon. So does that affect the outcome of the overall war? Did they defend the fatherland against these 10,000 platoons of tanks? What good is it having this wonder weapon that you can't deploy effectively against the enemy? What if they had a phased inverse quantum laser beam that completely disintegrated that platoon of Shermans at the subatomic level? Well, it doesn't matter because the vast majority of them are still out there marauding, killing everything they found. The U.S. was on the other side of the world for most of the fighting in World War II, so it was not just a war on 2 fronts. They had to cross the Atlantic Ocean to get to the fighting that way. They had to cross the Pacific Ocean to get to the fighting that way. So isolation is the biggest problem. You had to cross these oceans, and that presents all kind of logistical difficulties. And you're fighting the biggest war in the history of man, so you have to mass produce all your equipment. They had to mass produce the tanks. Let's say the factory in, say, Detroit. The next thing you have to do is get it across the continent. Okay, to get it across the continent, you load it onto rail cars. It has to fit on the rail car. Okay, the rail car isn't much bigger than the railroad tracks, so the tank can't be much wider than the railroad tracks. It has to fit through the smallest tunnel the train goes through between there and the shipyard. The rail car can only carry so much weight. Once you get it to the shipyard, you have to load it on the ship. Okay, you do that using a crane. You have to lift it up and set it over the side of the ship and down into the hold. The biggest crane had a capacity of 40 tons. Once you get overseas, you can't always just go up to the dock and have it drive off. Sometimes they do amphibious landings. They would put this vinyl thing around the tank that would inflate, and the tank, of all things, had to float. The tank had to wade ashore from the ocean. Once you get ashore, you're going to have to cross rivers and things. You're going to have to cross these portable bridges that the engineers set up. That has a weight capacity, has a size capacity, and you can't do that with these 60-ton beasts. The Sherman wasn't the biggest, most powerful tank they could build. It was the biggest, most powerful tank they could deploy en masse to the far reaches of the world. The Japanese had heavy tanks, but they couldn't deploy them to all those islands across the Pacific. They had to keep them in Japan and defend from an invasion of the home island, but they couldn't deploy them to Saipan and Iwo Jima and things like that. I've had people say that, okay, such and such group could build something like an AT-AT. Let's say Earth Force from Babylon 5. So if they built Babylon 5, this 5 miles long, they build these huge starships, that are a lot bigger. Certainly they could build something like an AT-AT too. Okay, let's say they can. Can they deploy it? Can they send 10,000 of them to the far reaches of the Cylon Empire somewhere in a distant corner of the galaxy? Because the Empire can. So can they build that many of them? Do they have vast internal spaces in their starships big enough to hold this beast? Okay. Do they have landing craft that can carry it down to the planet, but not only that, pick it up and take it back up to orbit? Okay, the AT-AT. So the Empire can do that. So your ability to deploy your equipment is far more important than what kind of equipment you have. Counterpoint with the Sherman. While they didn't fight many Tigers, they did occasionally fight Panthers. So they developed a longer barrel gun, the 76mm high velocity gun, and HVAP ammo, high velocity armor piercing. It had a tungsten penetrator. It could destroy a Panther from the front from nearly 1,000 yards away. Gosh, that would have come in handy. Too bad they didn't mass produce and issue it. Okay, so let that be a lesson. Standard equipment. What somebody produced in some lab somewhere 1,000 miles away is largely irrelevant. What you have in the battle on the site is what's important. Standard equipment versus standard equipment, the things you're going to actually have.
She'll let you for a chocolate bar. It's not true. It's not true? No. Okay, it's not true.
It's completely true.
We'll just give her some smokes.
A chocolate cake. Well? It was taken from a captured American private. It's still fresh. If you look at the wrapping, General, you will see it comes from Boston. And? General, do you realize what this means? It means that the Americans have fuel and planes to fly cake across the Atlantic Ocean.
These are a couple of fictitious events from movies, but compare the supply lines. We could send cake and stuff, luxuries, across the ocean for our privates, not just generals and stuff. The private had a fresh chocolate cake, and the Germans couldn't feed their people right there. Their people were starving, and their women were willing to trade, favors for food. How much territory do you have? Because the more territory, the more resources usually you have to draw upon. But the more trouble you have defending it. How are your forces distributed? Do you have all concentrated in one area? Are they spread out? Are they around the perimeter? Is it like, say, Germany in World War II? They had a few really powerful Tiger tanks that they weren't enough to defend the continent. Or the Allies that had a whole bunch of medium tanks that were enough to conquer the continent. Communications. The Systems Commonwealth in Andromeda, their influence spread across 3 large galaxies, but they didn't have FTL communications. You think that could be a logistic problem? Yeah. They had to send courier ships back and forth with intel and instructions and things like that. They couldn't just get on the horn and call somebody. Industrial capacity. Can you build equipment faster than the enemy can destroy it? The logistics affects everything every day. And real-life military officers have a saying, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. The vast majority of every war is fought on the ground. And the basic unit of every real-life military is the infantry rifleman. If you don't have riflemen, you don't have a military. Everything else is designed to support them in some way or another. And most real-life militaries also have what I like to call the 3 A's: artillery, air support, and armor. But explosives and all kinds of things like that as well. Boarding actions. Okay, they're not standing on the dirt, but that's your ground forces. They board the enemy ship or defend from the boarding parties. Space stations, things like that too. Of course, you can blast things to bits from orbit with a starship, but to capture it, to make it your own, you have to go in with your ground forces and capture it, and that's ground combat. It would be most of the time, whether you're assaulting a planet or defending a planet or a starship or a space station, whatever, the vast majority of the time, ground combat is going to be involved, and it's going to be the primary thing. I define winning as conquering and occupying the enemy's territory. Well, to occupy it, that's troops on the ground. That's your ground forces. Of course, once you capture it, you have to police the population. That's also your ground forces. And you have to defend it from the enemy coming back to recapture it, because they're going to want it back.
And to his brethren of the Tory, slayers of Ra, Hathor, Zetesh, Heruar, Sokar, Cronus, and Apophis.
Well, somebody's been keeping score. Colonel Jack O'Neill.
A familiar name. Cursed by every Goa'uld. Imhotep himself declared your days were numbered.
Well, that's fine. As long as it's a really big number.
By this point, they had really taken it to the Goa'uld, and this was a year before they had their first spaceship. So ground combat accounts for the majority of the actual fighting, so that makes it the next most important thing.
And where will all your generals be during this,
Launching a full assault on the Narn homeworld itself.
Maker, you can't be serious.
Of course I'm serious.
Rifa, any force attempting to invade Narn will be up to its neck in blood, its own.
We have no intention of invading Narn. Flattening it, yes, but invading it? We will be using mass drivers. By the time we are done, their cities will be in ruins. We can move in at our leisure.
Sometimes you may not be able to go in with your ground forces and win. Say if there's a large hostile population, say like Narn, or if you're trying to take out Coruscant or something like that. Well, they got more people than you can invade and conquer and control. So sometimes you would have to resort to your starships or whatever for large-scale bombardment. But if you do that, you also lose it yourself. You're basically salting the earth or poisoning the well. Because if you make the planet uninhabitable, you're not going to go in and take it either. So you both lose it. But more often you'd be softening up the target before landing troops, or using it for surgical strikes like really heavy artillery, taking out hard targets on the ground in support of your troops.
Doors are sealed, pretty thick too. Try to blast it open with C4, even use the shuttle's weapons, no luck.
We can use Destiny's main weapon and blow a hole in it. Yeah, and destroy the entire complex in the process. We'll dial down the power. 60%.
The doors are pretty thick, and the actual bunker's way underground, hundreds of feet. I'd say it's worth a shot.
Yeah. All right, give us the coordinates.
I got a lock.
Lieutenant, we are ready to fire. Are you clear of the area?
Yes, sir. Fire away.
Lieutenant.
Colonel, we're on site.
Nice shooting. It worked. We have to consider all the countermeasures such as planetary shields, planetary defense batteries, things of that nature. In some franchises, we see it takes days to effectively bombard a planet, and other things happens really quickly. Can you do it before their reinforcements arrive to challenge you? Most of the time, it's used in support of your ground forces, or you use the genocide type bombardment when your ground forces fail.
Perhaps when the warships of your world attack, we'll be able...
Excuse me, did you say the ships of our world?
Surely you have such vessels.
Well, we have a number of shuttles.
These shuttles, they are a formidable craft.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Bad day.
This is everyone's favorite topic, and I'm not trying to belittle it by putting it so far down the list, but ship-to-ship combat only becomes a factor if you can match the enemy logistically, if you can get your ships consistently in a position to engage their ships. Remember, the powerful German Tiger tanks couldn't intercept and engage the smaller, less powerful American Shermans, so it didn't really matter. Well, that difficulty is magnified in interstellar warfare because you have much greater distance, you have a greater difference in transit time and speed. Ship-to-ship combat would really happen more often when you have two logistically matched opponents, but when there's a vast difference, it wouldn't really happen all that often. Starships mostly would ferry troops and equipment from planet to planet. They do that far more often than they'd actually engage in actual combat. Ship-to-ship combat hasn't been a major decisive factor in a major war since the Age of Sail. In World War II, there were no battleship versus battleship engagements. The Bismarck mixed it up with some cruisers, and I think one of the Iowa-class ships mixed it up with some destroyers or something, but the Iowa-class ships and the Yamato and sister ship and Bismarck, those ships never met each other. So there were no battleship versus battleship engagements in all of World War II. In World War I, there was one major ship versus ship engagement, so it wasn't a decisive factor in either of the world wars. I feel that it would constitute a small fraction of the actual fighting in most of these conflicts, and it's so dependent on the logistical situation that's why I put it so far down the list.
Where's our boosters? Fluvial dampers? No! That's not it! Bring me the hydrospanner!
You know, the Borg don't use alveol nappers. Heck, they don't even have hydrospanners. So obviously they don't stand a chance. Can we all agree that's a bad argument and thereby stop using it? I mean, admit it, a lot of the arguments that you see just change those names and that's the argument that's used. What something's called or the theory behind how it works. And the idea is, well, just imagine with that kind of technology what they can do in an actual conflict. But in most of these franchises, there are actual conflicts to observe. So people would rather talk about technobabble and stuff as if they really understand it. Even the content creators don't understand it. Rather than pulling examples from the show to prove their point. It becomes the de facto sci-fi trash talk. And see, I'm one of those type of people, I'm a skeptic. You can't just tell me, you got to show me. See, I take a pragmatic approach, so to me it's not how something works, but rather how well it works. You see, stars run on fusion, but it's more powerful than a warp core. So with that mindset, can we say, okay, Minbari ships run on fusion, so they're a lot less advanced and a lot less powerful than a warp-powered ship? Well, no, not just because fusion versus warp core. What is the power output of a fusion reactor? Wouldn't we need to know how fast it burns through the fuel? What something's called or what it looks like or whether you flip a switch or touch a panel is largely irrelevant. It's the established capabilities. How well does it work? In the actual examples in the actual program. So why did I put this so far down the list? Well, if you have war-making technology, it's typically going to be in the area of logistics or ground combat or bombardment, ship-to-ship combat, things like that. What we're talking about here is overall technology. Maybe you can crack the enemy's codes more easily. If you have impressive medical technology, maybe you can save more injured soldiers. Or if the enemy uses chemicals, things like that, maybe you can find counter agents more easily. Things of that nature. Let's say opponent A has really impressive guided missiles, and they always hit their targets. Opponent B comes up with impressive ECM that throws the guided missiles off. Well, side A comes up with more impressive guidance, so they hit their targets again. Side B comes up with more impressive ECM. They don't anymore. So more impressive guidance, more impressive ECM, more impressive guidance, more impressive ECM, climb to each other like a ladder. But side C over here has old-fashioned howitzers. So those projectiles fly a mathematical trajectory. So once the projectile has left the tube, no amount of ECM is going to throw it off course. It's going to hit.
You said this is tritanium, right?
That's correct.
Chief, did you ever hear of a TR-116 rifle?
It was a prototype, developed by Starfleet Security to operate in energy-dampening fields or radiogenic environments.
That's right. Anywhere where a normal phaser would be useless. If I'm not mistaken, the TR-116 rifle fired a chemically propelled tritanium bullet.
A lot of people boast that in their favorite franchise they can flip a switch and make all of your weapons useless. That does happen sometimes in sci-fi, and the phaser is sometimes susceptible to that. So would you rather be the field commander that says, well, man, I don't know what's going on, our phasers aren't working, good luck? Or would you rather be the commander that says, our phasers are inoperative, switch to the TR-116, remember your training, short control bursts. So I'm not promoting lower technology over higher technology by any stretch of the imagination. What I'm saying is having a variety of technologies at your disposal is better than just putting all your faith in one magic box that's going to solve all your problems. If you do that, it's easier to come up with a countermeasure. If you have a variety of capabilities, it's more difficult. If you have as many measures as the enemy has countermeasures, then you can remain combat effective.
There was no random ion cannon test.
It says a Goa'uld ship entered orbit and that the ion cannons fired in defense.
Ineffectively.
I don't see how that could be. Our ion cannons have always been successful against Goa'uld motherships.
Maybe this Goa'uld has developed shields that defend against them.
That would be catastrophic. We have no other weapons capable of defending.
They have no other weapons capable of defending. They put all their faith in this one magic box, and when it doesn't work anymore, they're helpless. Maybe if they had a couple more tools in the box. A lot of people will say in Star Trek they have this beaming technology. They can just teleport from the ground to orbit and all this kind of stuff, make you disappear over here and reappear over there. And they don't have anything like that in Star Wars. It's just obviously far more advanced. But let's flip that around. In Star Wars, you can't look both ways without seeing a sentient robot. They may have more robots than they do people. They have robot cooks, robot police, robot detectives. They have robot pilots, robot soldiers. It just goes on and on and on. And in Star Trek, the only robot they have is Data, and they didn't build Data, and they can't reproduce Data. They can barely repair Data. So you could say, based on that, their technology is far superior. So is it really fair to take your strength and say, okay, based on our strength, that's also your weakness, we're far more advanced? The enemy can do that too. So it's better to look at all the categories and say, okay, advantage here, disadvantage there, decide based on the entire body of work rather than just this magic box over here or that magic box over there. Let's look at the whole range of overall technologies. In this section, we're talking about skills like how good your pilots are, things like that, how good your officers are at planning tactics, how good your generals are at planning strategy, and some people may be surprised to put it below some of the other categories. Well, I do consider it very important. That's why it's one of the big six. But why is it below technology and logistics, things like that? Well, even the best pilot in a biplane wouldn't be able to handle an average pilot in an F-15 or F-22. Another thing is it's subjective. I could say, well, Grand Admiral Thrawn has better strategic planning than Captain Sisko. Well, he may not. Everybody's going to pick their favorite. So it's subjective, and that makes it harder to rate. So I put it below some of the other things. Also, even Napoleon, perhaps the greatest strategic mind ever, even Napoleon, without a single spaceship, couldn't handle any of the spacefaring governments that we're talking about. He doesn't have the logistical capability to get there, so it's not a level playing field. Level playing field, yes, he could really cause them trouble, but it's not a level playing field in most of these comparisons. When we're talking about interstellar war with interstellar distance, some of the other categories are more limiting than the mind of your commander, or the skill of your pilot, or the skill of your soldier. Take one group that has all those things, and for strategy and all, they're just competent. You have somebody else that doesn't have those things. Even if they're a genius, they're not going to compete. So that's why I consider it very important, because a lot of times with great strategy, great planning, a lower force can defeat a higher force, United States and Vietnam. It is very important, but typically it's less limiting than some of the other things, so that's why I put it on the bottom. But anyway, that's the list of judgment criteria in order of importance, the things that you need to wage interstellar warfare. Based on if you have strengths in the top areas, it's the most empowering. If you have weaknesses in the top areas, it's the most limiting, and cascading down the list. I also have a PDF list just below this link, which has all kinds of subcategories and things like that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the commentary. I'll see you next time.